Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on Bloomberg Quint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines this morning. Asian markets are off to a subdued start ahead of a 10-day break for Japan. US markets ended mixed while the dollar is at a 4-month high. Acquisitions and capacity ramp-up led to Tata Steel surprising analyst estimates in January-March quarter. Axis Bank missed its net profit estimates for the March quarter despite a substantial rise in other income. Asset quality improved for the fourth straight quarter. Exposure to IL&FS is likely to weigh on Yes Bank's March quarter performance. The lender has a 2,600 crore rupee exposure to the infrastructure conglomerate. And Hero MOTOCORP is likely to continue the week's trend in auto sector earnings. A double-digit decline in volumes is likely to hurt the two-wheeler maker with regard to its overall performance. Let's talk about the US markets now. It is a mixed day of trade for those markets. While the Dow and the S&P 500 ended in the red, especially the Dow with cuts of about 0.5%. Gains in tech shares ensured that the Nasdaq ended in the green. Investors will now look forward to the economic data, that is the US GDP data, that will be reported later today. Ranita Young of Bloomberg News brings you all you need to know about the US markets as of yesterday.
U.S. markets are mixed on Thursday as earnings spark a rally in tech stocks, however, send industrial shares lower. Investors are looking to see if this latest batch of earnings could breathe new life into the global stock rally. And they're hoping that because these latest earnings are pretty positive, that it's mitigating some of the concerns over slowing global growth. Now, one company that helped that out was Facebook. Shares are surging on sales growth and optimism for a settlement. Microsoft third quarter revenue beats the highest analyst estimate, with the company now surpassing $1 trillion of valuation. And 3M, however, quite a different story, cutting its full year forecasts, saying it'll lose 2,000 jobs, and shares losing more than 12%, dropping to the lowest since Black Monday in 1987. Southwest Airlines first quarter earnings per share beating the highest analyst estimate. However, it sees the 737 MAX groundings and its Hawaii debut as boosting costs for travel. Spirit Airlines first quarter adjusted earnings per share matching analyst estimates. However, Bank of America Merrill Lynch cut the stock rating to neutral over lower revenue view. And meanwhile, treasuries dipped a little bit after solid U.S. durable goods data, and the Bloomberg Dollar Index rose slightly, as did the U.S. dollar versus major currency competitors. The Bloomberg Commodity Index, however, was a little bit lower. So was WTI. Gold, however, was a little bit higher. And on Friday, we have first quarter GDP figures coming out. This should give us a view of how the economy responded to the U.S. government shutdown, as well as the fourth quarter market's rout. And that's a look at your Thursday Wall Street action in New York. I'm Ranita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, so mixed signals, perhaps you can call it that, from the U.S. markets as of now. Let's take a look at the Asian markets. Rosalind Chin is joining us live from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. Rosalind, just trying to contemplate that 10-day break for Japan. It's a little hard for us here in India because we don't get more than a day. But how are we looking at the end of the week?
So indeed, there are many people looking ahead to that 10-day stretch in which we'll see the emperor abdicate in Japan and also his son take over as the emperor. So we are also looking at thinner volumes ahead of that holiday as well. So what we're looking at across Asia-Pacific, though, is generally a down day. So the MSCI Asia-Pacific Index is losing about 1/3%. In Tokyo, the Nikkei is down 2/3%. The Topix losing 0.75%. Now, we have been saying there's been trade talks between Japan and the U.S. Taro Aso, the finance minister, has been talking to the Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin in Washington, and we did see Taro Aso come out and say that Japan cannot agree to any talk of linking currency and trade policy. That has been something that the U.S. has been apparently pushing for, and Japan pushing back. So that has been a key concern for many. Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister, is set to meet Donald Trump later on Friday. We did have a bit of data out of Japan. We saw the jobless rate with the market still looking pretty tight there in general as well. Now, over in China, we do see the Shanghai Composite is losing about 0.15%, as well as the CSI 300. Stocks generally in China have been slumping this week. The Shanghai Composite losing more than 4% overall, and set for its worst performance since October. In fact, it has been until now well, it still is actually the world's best performing stock market so far, but it could be a bit of a tipping point. We're expecting more than 1,000 companies to report today, as a slew of earnings are coming out ahead of that April 30th deadline, and these results could in fact be a little bit of a marker for how the rest of how the market will do in China for the coming days or possibly even weeks as well. We're seeing some dollar strength as well, so we could see some capital assets flowing into the US and away from emerging markets like Asia as well. And of course, we did see that China, or at least investors, have been interpreting some signals from China that it may be scaling back stimulus. So all these factors there affecting what the markets are doing in China. So a little bit of a down day right now. But even as I speak, I can see that the CSI 300 is sort of flipping ever so slightly into positive territory. So we'll have to see how the markets unfold for the rest of the day. The Hang Seng is up by about 0.1%. I suspect that is largely because of Tencent. Tencent and Nintendo are going to tie up together to release the Switch console in China. So that seems to be helping the Hang Seng there. Tencent shares are up right now about 1/3%. And in Australia, bit of a down day there as well, but down by less than 0.1% at this moment in time. BHP, Fortescue, Woodside Petroleum there pulling lower. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Well, let's turn to the Indian markets now, and clearly earnings have been in focus. Agam Vakil is here to tell you all about the trade setup for the day and also futures and options space. Agam, well, we may not have 1,000 companies, but we had two nifty companies that were quite important.
Yes,
and they're going to be in. How
yes.
are we looking today, though?
Well, we're not looking so great, Alex, because we're seeing SGX Nifty giving up some of the gains. So, well, we perhaps could very likely see a negative start in today's day of trade, considering a 94-point cut on the SGX Nifty futures. How did we do yesterday? Well, not too good. At least as far as the Nifty is concerned. We saw 0.7 of a decline there. A mid-cap and the small-cap indices, well, outperforming, but not doing as well either. And the Nifty Banking Index and the PSU Banking Index certainly showing a lot of weakness, and that perhaps is one pocket which is also put pressure on the indices. But let's move on and talk about your ADRs. Dr. Reddy's and Wipro among the only two stocks which advance. On the other hand, some weakness in Tata Motors and HDFC Bank. Of course, not too much movement for Vedanta, Infosys and ICICI Bank. But let's move on and talk about FII flows. And one might expect that considering indices declined, there would have been an outflow from FIIs, but no, there's actually been $500 million coming in, which is surprising. Of course, this has to do with some sort of bulk deals, and DI is on the other hand selling stock worth 4,000 crores. So we've certainly seen a lot in terms of churn yesterday. Now, when it comes to contributors, it was evenly poised in terms of those stocks which were bearing down on the indices, including something like a Reliance Industries, HDFC Twins or ICICI Bank. But let's move on and talk about your futures and options space. And it is a new series, and we're looking at May. Naturally, we'll see 59% addition in open interest. It's the same for the Nifty Banking futures too, where we see about 30% OI increase towards shorts possibly. And this is, of course, your open interest distribution, where we're likely to see some resistance around the 11,800 mark. But let's move on and talk about your open interest distribution and change in general. So there you have it. Again, 12,000 remains the one with the one with a considerable OI writing, and it's the same for the lower end 11,500 put. But moving on, we can talk about your VIX. It's come off to a certain extent, declined for the second straight day, but still at high enough levels at around 23.2. The Nifty put call ratio remains largely unchanged at around 1.6. We watch out for that. It's going to be a crucial one. And of course, we're going to see just increase in OI generally. So we have BHEL, Nestle India, M&M Financial, as well as something like Torrent Pharma. And of course, these are so Suzlon Energy. So a bunch of stocks out there that we need to keep an eye on. But again, indices likely to open weak.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. Well, let's have a look at what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
We start with the latest on the Trump administration. Bloomberg sources say the Trump administration may concede to a Chinese proposal to give less protection for U.S. pharmaceutical products than they receive at home. The move could draw opposition from the American drug industry. The Chinese offer is being discussed as part of wider trade talks. It would give U.S. drug companies 8 years of regulatory data protection in China, 2 years less than they get under the new NAFTA deal between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The British government, meanwhile, has agreed to host economic talks with China in June, despite Chinese Vice Premier expressing regret that relations have fluctuated over tensions in the South China Sea. In contrast, Chancellor Philip Hammond said the London talks would continue what he called a golden era of relations. Hammond is in Beijing for the Belt and Road Forum, where President Xi speaks later on Friday. A British government official says Prime Minister Theresa May is unlikely to put her Brexit bill to Parliament next week and will have to accept that the UK must hold European elections. Despite agreeing to a 6-month extension with the EU back in March, May wants to get her Brexit deal ratified in time to avoid the vote. However, the House of Commons program of business for next week makes no mention of the bill. To Sri Lanka now, the country's government has sharply lowered the number of people known to be killed in the Easter Sunday bomb attacks. Officials now say around 253 people died, and that is a downward estimate from the earlier reported toll of 359. They say the chaotic scenes after the attacks made it difficult to count the exact number. The UK Foreign Office is now advising against all essential travel to Sri Lanka, saying further attacks are very likely. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
At a headline level, Axis Bank reported earnings which looked slightly below expectations, a profit figure of about 1,505 crore rupees against a loss of about 2,188 in the same quarter last year. However, the bank said that they've created some extra provisioning for some select accounts which they have identified as potentially stressed assets. So because of that, the profit number looked slightly below expectations. But if you net that off, the numbers are largely in line with the expectations. And they've delivered on most of the parameters. A strong pre-provisioning operating profit growth coming in for them this time around, a growth of about 37% on a YOY basis. Even the asset quality was good this time around, with gross NPAs coming in at about 5.26% versus 5.75% on a sequential basis, and net NPAs coming in at about 2.06% versus about 2.36% on a sequential basis. Margins as well were largely stable at about 3.44%. However, they saw a loan growth of about 12.5%, which was below expectations of about 16% on a YOY basis. And the reason for the same was degrowth in the international loan book. So that was one factor which stood out for them this time around. Domestic loans grew by about 18%, retail loans about 19%, SME book grew by about 12%, and corporate loan book grew by about 5% for them this time around. Provisioning came in at about 2,711 crore rupees, like I mentioned, slightly higher than expectations. Fee income grew by about 23%. Their provisioning coverage ratio as well grew to about 77% versus about 75% in the same quarter last year. So overall, a good set of earnings coming in from Axis Bank this time around.
With Maruti coming out with earnings, it's quite evident that auto companies are under pressure. Demand has been slowing, and probably because of that, we have seen slowdown in the financial performance as well. If you look at Hero MotoCorp, we are expecting a 9% decline in overall sales, a 20 to 23% decline in EBITDA, as well as profits are seen as far as fourth quarter for Hero MotoCorp is concerned on a year-on-year basis. Margins are also expected to remain under pressure. Margins are seen declining to a level of 14% versus a level of 16% last year, same period. Now, the key factors that will be clearly putting pressure on the performance for Hero MotoCorp in the third and the fourth quarter were decline in the sales volume growth figures. In fact, in the fourth quarter, we saw the volumes decline by nearly 11%. However, the silver lining here being that the price hikes, could be improving the realization for Hero MotoCorp by 2 to 3% year on year. Of course, apart from the earnings, the management commentary on the rural demand is something important we will be watching out for, apart from their update on the new launches as well as the business opportunities in the export markets. Overall, expect a weak quarter for Hero MotoCorp this time on the back of slower volume growth as well as margin pressure.
Yes Bank is expected to report steady set of earnings this time around, so we are looking forward to a net interest income figure of about 2,707 crore rupees. That will be a growth of about 26% on a YOY basis. Profit is expected to come in at about 1,024 crore rupees. That will be down by about 13% on a YOY basis. We are factoring in pre-provisioning operating profit growth of about 2,260 crore rupees, which will be an uptick of about 6% on a YOY basis. Loan growth for them is expected to remain ahead of the system at about 24%, mainly backed by refinancing opportunities, a strong growth in retail banking and sell down of portfolios, other factors that are going to aid loan growth for them this time around. Deposit growth as well is expected to remain healthy at about 19% on a YOY basis. We've seen a growth of about 20% for Axis Bank when it comes to deposits. Similar figure we are expecting for Yes Bank as well. Margins are expected to pick up to about 3.4%. Other income for them is again expected to be strong, led by third-party distribution and processing fees, and asset quality is expected to be largely stable. What will be keenly watched out for from Yes Bank is when the management speaks out. Remember, the management is new, so the street is actually looking forward to the commentary coming in from the new Yes Bank management with regards to the road path ahead for them.
So there are lots of results that have come in, very important ones, starting with CYIENT. They had an okay result. Their revenues are down 2%, EBITDA is down 3.5%, margins are at 12.1% versus 12.3%. The net profit was up 90% due to other income of 79 crores in this quarter. Then we have Biocon, which came in with a strong set of numbers. Their revenues are up 31%, net profit is up 64%, EBITDA is up 73% and margins are at 26% versus 20%. GHCL's revenues were up 26%, their net profit is up 44%, EBITDA is up 31.5% and margins are at 26.1% versus 25.1%. Then we have SBI Life Insurance. They had a robust premium growth. VNB margin improvement was led by mix change and improvement in average ticket size, banker productivity and persistency. Then Tata Steel had better than estimates operational numbers. The revenues were up 26%, the net profit was down 76% and adjusted EBITDA was up 33% and margins stand at 18.4% versus 17.3%. And lastly, we have Rallis India. The revenues are down 8.5%, net profit is down 92%, very weak set of numbers. EBITDA is down 80% and margins are at 2% versus 9%. Their raw materials as a percentage of sales are at 76% versus 60%.
All right, several stories that you can find on the website bloombergquint.com if you log on right now. First up, the Supreme Court appointed retired Justice A.K. Patnaik to inquire the allegations of Delhi-based lawyer Utsav Bains that there was a conspiracy to frame the Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, on sexual harassment charges. In his inquiry, Justice Patnaik will be assisted by the Central Bureau of Investigation, the Delhi Police and the Intelligence Bureau. The other story we have for you is that the Goods and Service Tax Investigation Body has alleged that ITC has made undue profits by not passing on the benefit of GST rate cuts to consumers. The amount of undue profits, though, have yet to be ascertained. That's all we have for you on this edition of All You Need to Know, but do stay tuned. There's a lot more on Bloomberg Quint over the course of the day. Thanks so much for joining us.